Welcome to the Music Mission. My name is Panayoti Karmos. I am a music teacher in Sydney, Australia, as well as the conductor and director of the Modest Orchestra, an orchestra consisting of passionate professional musicians that prioritizes the education and enjoyment of music through the performance of staple works and new compositions. All recordings you hear, including this background music, come from our public performances, which you can find on YouTube if you search up Modest Orchestra. This podcast is designed for all lovers of music, no matter your musical preference, experience, or expertise. Now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. On today's episode, I'll be talking to Reese Little, whom I've known since... Reese, when did we meet? 2010? Was it?
9, I think.
2009,
I'm
wow.
pretty sure, yeah.
So Reese and I, we met in high school at Con High and have remained pretty good friends, playing in brass pieces together, playing in orchestra, and we're now doing this podcast over the internet.
Woo.
So, yeah, say hi, Reese.
Hello.
Could you give a bit of background about who you are, your musical background experience throughout Con High and stuff? Just so the listeners get an idea of who you are.
Yeah, okay. So I'm probably not entirely different to Penny. Started out like so many other brass players as a little primary school kid in school band, had no idea what was going on, got given a baritone horn, and was surprisingly competent at it. Eventually got moved.
That was like with being a trumpet.
Yeah. Got moved on to euphonium a year later, which made me very sad, actually, because I liked the baritone because it was so easy to play. It's the easiest instrument in the world. Everyone says euphonium's easy, but baritone is even easier.
Yeah, the smaller bore, I guess.
Yeah, and eventually, obviously, I liked it. And started to get sort of semi-decent at it, which was a surprise to everyone because we have no musical history in the family whatsoever. So the big thing that happened is my teacher at that time was just a university student, and he was very lovely, and he was a French horn player. And at a certain point, he gave up, and he sort of said, "I can't teach him anymore. I need to give him to someone else."
When was this?
Oh, this would have been around year 5, I think. He decided
that
I needed to. Basically, he decided I needed to learn from Steve Rosso, the SSO principal.
From that young.
Yeah, it was a kind of good giving up. And so I went along to Steve, and I still really had zero idea what I was doing. But I went to Steve, and we had a little tryout lesson. It ended up going for 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
And that was it. That's where it sort of became a bit serious. I kept learning from Steve for probably, I think it was about 10 years in the end, through all of high school.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, maybe a bit less than 10 years then. But from the end of the last couple of years of primary school all the way up to year 12. Yeah. But along the way, the whole composing thing happened.
Who was your composing teacher? So there was Tristan, there was Alex, there was Trevor. I had Trevor.
Yeah.
I feel like you also had Trevor at one stage?
Had Trevor for a semester in university, actually. But to start with at the Con High, I got the most eccentric, wonderful composition teacher called Hugh Belling to start with. And he was wild. He would... I'm going to run over to the piano for 1 second. What he would do, the first lesson, I remember, he was teaching us about what the modes are in compositions. And his way of demonstrating them was literally, this is the Ionian mode. I hope you heard that.
I heard that. It came through very clear. That was great.
Great.
And so... What was his I guess reasoning for teaching you the modes in that way? Because I think you might remember from high school, Mr. Fowler would just play Joy to the World, the descending scale, bum 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 bum, and just do whatever inflection he needed.
Yeah.
Was that, do you think his just way of like shocking you, or was that training your ear?
It was kind of shock value and entertainment all rolled in one. It was the most exciting thing. And we were having group composition lessons at that point. So I think there were 3 of us and the 3 little kids in the packed into the practice room with Hugh on the piano, and he'd just play every single mode as a big cluster, and he'd be like, "Right, kids, that's what the mode is. Keep up." And then it was on to the next thing, which was great. It was super fast. After about, I think, a year, maybe a year and a half with Hugh, I swapped over to his best friend, Jack Simmons, who then became my real main composition teacher.
Right.
I had Jack from, I think it was some year 8 or year 9 all the way to the end of high school. And I think he's still the most important composition teacher I ever had, because he taught me everything that I know.
Yeah.
And is the smartest person I've ever met. I swear I learnt everything I know about musicology more from Jack than I do from the high school.
Wow. Just the whole high school experience is just this one person. Wow.
Yep. Well, in the musicology terms, like if I turned up and I hadn't written anything, if he'd asked me to write something and I didn't do it, it'd be trip to the library time. And we'd go to the library and I'd be sent home with a whole backpack full of scores to listen to for next week.
That's very good.
Great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So here you are rocking up like one lesson, maybe, or two, depending. You hadn't had anything. He goes, right, I'm going to take this as an opportunity. We're going to expand our background listening and our just exposure to everything.
Yeah. His whole idea was based around, you can't be a good composer if you don't know other music.
That's so true.
And it's something that even at the uni, the Sydney Conservatorium, is sort of missed out on a little bit, actually, that you just have to have an incredibly healthy diet of other music, even if it has nothing to do with your own. Because...
Or even if you just don't like it.
Yeah, because you can't just invent everything yourself. You have to steal ideas at some stage, and you have to get an... it gives you a sense of your sort of cultural surroundings. It roots everything in what's already going on. It gives you a sense of what is good and what's bad, as much as that's sort of subjective. You start to get a sense of that. If you listen to enough music, you think what works well and what doesn't work well, and you start to think what you like and what you don't like, and then you sort of begin to get a direction of your own.
That's fabulous. That is so true. And like you said, it's something that I guess is also missed out in the performance aspect of at the Sydney Conservatorium. It's just something I had to really do myself in terms of just exposure to different type of genres, different pedagogical ways of teaching, I found. And it's like you said, you have to steal things if you want to compose. I think we both had Dr. Gooding Brown as our art teacher, and
oh no,
her famous line was GB was there's no such thing as original art. Everything stems from somewhere. And she always went on about this idea of remember the backpack? The backpack of knowledge.
That one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I keep that with me to this very day, which is your output and your view of the world is just so influenced by this backpack that you carry with you. And in this backpack is everything you've been exposed to. And the one thing that she never wanted us to ever lose, which I think you and I are very good at this, which is just constantly absorbing everything around us like a sponge.
Oh yeah, well it's the most important thing, I think. I mean, it's a good analogy, because the more that you listen to, or the more that you're exposed to generally, it doesn't even have to be music. It can be all sorts of other art. You should read lots of books if you want to be a good composer.
Yes, I've heard that. Yeah,
like the more that you absorb, the more knowledge that you have, and the more knowledge that you have, the more creative power that you have, I think.
Do you find yourself? So you said you have to read to be a good. Or you find that a lot of good composers.
Well, I think it's helpful too. Yeah.
Yeah, like what do they read? Just could you give me an example?
All sorts of stuff. Like, I mean, some composers are very, very full on. I just read whatever the hell I feel like. Really, I don't read nearly enough. I think. Only if I get time. Like when I was out at Hill End recently, out in the countryside, I was reading Peter Carey's True History of the Kelly Gang, which felt super authentic, living in a country village, which was a gold mining town around the time of Ned Kelly. But there's other composers that it's kind of stimulation. You need brain stimulation. So, what was it? I think Prokofiev was a really extremely good chess player. There's all sorts of funny things like that.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah, Elgar was a chemist. Apparently, he painted his own brand of soap at some point.
Really?
Yep.
That's so interesting. So Elgar has his own soap. That's great.
Yeah, or he did, or something like that. But he was a
did at one
full-time
point.
chemist, and that's what he'd do when he needed to escape writing his music.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience that you just had recently, where you ran off into the countryside and you composed. What did you compose? And you could tell us about it, and just like the experience surrounding it. This whole idea of just going off somewhere.
Yeah,
to
right. So
compose.
it's a little bit of a digression from the whole progressing into being a real composer kind of thing, but I'll try to fit it in. Through university, I kept composing and learning to compose in more or less the same way as I did at high school. You just sort of keep doing it, and you get critique and you get feedback and all that, and you try to get your pieces performed as much as you possibly can. You just sort of slowly grow, spread your wings. And along the way, you sort of apply for everything that you possibly can, just in case some opportunities actually happen. And I happened to Google things that were on in New South Wales that I could find. And I found this Hill End Artist in Residence program, which is run out of Bathurst Regional Art Gallery.
Right.
So Hill End, as I said, is an old gold mining town. It's sort of a historical site, except that people actually live in it. So it's quite a funny sort of management structure of the whole town. But it's really out in a sort of hilly area in the middle of bloody nowhere, an hour out of Bathurst. And
Wow.
coming out of university, actually, this goes right back to the start. As a kid, the sort of music that really, really got me wanting to write stuff, or got me to inspired to write actually interesting music at all, right from the start, was really big, fat symphonic music like Bruckner and Mahler.
Oh,
and
Yep.
yeah, that's the kind of. I mean, you get it. You're a brass player.
I do, of course.
And pictures of an exhibition and all that sort of stuff. Great music.
Oof.
And when you're a composer in the current sort of climate, you get almost zero opportunity to actually do anything like that. I mean, no one's writing out symphonies exactly the same way as Mahler and Bruckner were, but
no,
if a composer gets an orchestra spot, especially a young composer, they're lucky if they get given 5 or 10 minutes at the start of the program, and they just have to write something short and attention grabbing.
Yep.
There's very little opportunity for really making big, substantial pieces, and people aren't quite willing to take the risk on it because there's this quite conservative commissioning culture in, most of the world, but especially in Australia.
Yes, I've noticed that. And if it is a new work, or I guess new work in parentheses, it's just something by, I don't know, just something we already know by an Australian composer. And very rarely, seldom do you hear a new symphony being composed. You hear like an overture or something that's about 10 minutes, something bite-sized. But that is something that is lacking from culture, which is people aren't writing symphonies the same way as they used to.
Yeah, well,
it's 100 or so years ago.
And it's not that people don't want to. I mean, there's a little part of it that's slightly less fashionable than it used to be. But in Australia particularly, there's a real thing that we much rather get our big red meat programming from Germany. and
right.
It's like this, a certain dead fellow called Ludwig van Beethoven gets every single year much more concert time than all the living composers in Australia combined. And it's not that Beethoven's terrible, but in a funny way that there's this, there's a reluctance to acknowledge that what we can do here can be on that kind of level. I mean, and it sounds like a sort of egotistical thing to say, because obviously Beethoven's the real shit. That's the real deal.
Yes.
But especially with the Beethoven anniversary this year, I had the thought that the amount that Beethoven gets played is kind of ironic, considering that the real lesson of Beethoven is that music needs to move forward. The Beethoven is in a lot of ways the archetypal sort of modernist. The only reason that we
Yes.
think he's absolutely fantastic, and he really is because he came about at a time of Mozart and Haydn, and everything was fairly boring, and you had Haydn mass producing symphonies.
He wrote hundreds of them.
Yeah,
You know?
well, 104 or
Try-
something, isn't it?
109.
Is it? Oh dear.
Oh, I don't know. Oh
Shit.
dear,
So
this
we'll
is
have to do a
a
quick
bit of
Google.
a
This is bad research.
this is bad research.
Yeah, and Beethoven comes along and says, no, music doesn't need to just be sort of light entertainment for people. It can be some serious heavy shit. Like the stuff that he was writing really right towards the end of his life, especially when he was nearly deaf or completely deaf, we don't really know, is so ridiculously modern. But he gets absolutely played to death without anyone thinking about that's what the real lesson of Beethoven is, that if culture doesn't continually evolve, there's not really much point. It will die off. I mean, that's why all the audiences in these days average age of 70 million.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. 7 million. I wonder what he would have think. Obviously, he'd be quite honored that, we're playing a lot of his music, but I think he'd be quite frustrated in thinking that why are they still playing my music? Move on from it for God's sake, almost, really.
Well, yeah, I think there's people talk about classical music being for some reason a museum piece, and it's the worst thing, because the one thing that is important in the almost sort of the defining characteristic of God forbid Western art music is that over a period of maybe 500-600 years, it underwent such rapid progress, and a lot happened really quickly. And around the sort of turn of the 20th century, things got so big. We hit the big late Romantic high point with things like Bruckner and Mahler, and the wars happened, and everything else happened in between. And suddenly, everyone was scared of doing anything new, because there was a sense that the old culture was all sort of bankrupt and everything. And I mean, there's sort of responsibility all over the place. I think the eagerness to dispatch with old music may have been sort of too much from the post Second World War generation of composers, and so maybe their music was too difficult for people to listen to. But either way, we end up in this funny situation where there's a long way of explaining it, but like composers these days do not get to write big fat pieces very often. And it's a shame, because there are certain things that you can only say when you have a really, really big canvas to say them.
Yep.
Like
the full colors of the orchestra.
Yeah, and it's you can obviously write incredible short music. I mean, you need to listen to Georgi Kurtag or any people like that for just to know that. But there's a lack of just monumental shit. And
that's out there.
Yeah, and it's sort of people among composers, there's also a little bit of a reluctance to do it. It seems like it's just not particularly in fashion to try to write really huge pieces these days anymore. But I think it's, in a way, a kind of rationalization of the commissioning environment, that if you're not going to get to do it, people just give up on the idea altogether.
So in a kind of way, like, well, it's never going to get played. Why should I put so much energy and effort into it, I suppose?
Yeah. And obviously, there are more efficient. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's a bit hard with the delay. So, there is a little hand up feature if you notice.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
And
beep.
Yeah, it's very cool.
There we go.
Beep. There we go. So, I mean, there are competitions over, like in Berlin, for example, where like these competitions where you can enter and have a live orchestra play it, but it's not quite the same, is it?
Well, yeah.
Or is it?
What's the really good Bartok quote? And I think he said, "Competitions are for horses, not for artists."
Right. Okay.
Which you kind of have to keep in mind, but you can't be that cynical, because if you don't, as a composer, engage with all of these kind of things, you don't get anything to happen. Like everything in the society that we have now is sort of, people call it late capitalist or whatever. No one knows what it'll be next year with the whole virus and everything. But
with the whole virus,
the whole way society works is everyone's very aware that everything's a competition. Everything. And so
Constantly.
these sort of music competitions are a kind of like they're a little bit of a catch-22 thing, because you have to put in the effort to write a great piece if you're going to win these things. But the chance of winning it is out of however many entrants there are. And so there's always a sort of trade-off where is it worth it? Is it worth it? And I don't think like competitions in themselves can't just I think they're good in that they're better than nothing, but they can't just exist as the primary sort of driver of commissioning. At some point you kind of just have to trust composers, give them money if you can, and say write something, just go. Yeah.
And that's something we talked about always with John Lynch. So I was auditing the postgraduate wind conducting seminar for 2 years because I maxed out on the conducting credits in second year. And I said, oh, golly me, what am I going to do for the next 2 years? So John Lynch said, oh, just come join the postgrads. Yeah, so that was fish out of water.
I should have done that.
Yeah, I mean, I got all the books, so I can highly recommend you some to read. Very fascinating stuff. And things we talked about were commissioning, commissions. And John Lynch, this is why, in Modest or Modeste, we have this culture flowing throughout this core of it, which is always commission new works and really give no limits to the person other than say, hey, look, please don't go over 20-ish minutes because we want to program other stuff as well. We kind of want every piece to be 20 minutes so we just fit in as many things. And one of the things he said was when you commission, ideally pay money when you can, if money exists, which is something I want to really look into down the track. But just kind of tell the composer, which is you in this case, for those people listening who haven't really caught on, we've commissioned Reese to write a piece.
Sneaky announcement.
And so let them run off for a while, for a few months, which is what we've had right now, and then come together, the two of you, and talk through the piece, what you've done, and kind of just liaise with that person about, what they want, what their vision is, how does it sync with yours. And I think for me, new works are so important. If we didn't have new works throughout our entire musical culture, then we wouldn't have music the way it progressed.
Oh, we wouldn't have anything.
We wouldn't have anything. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like my view, I haven't got a holistic view of the entire world, and probably you're better versed at this because, inherently as a composer, I suppose you're more engaged with new works than I am. But I feel like it has stagnated a little bit in terms of orchestral composing and just taking risks, and so I really want to fuel that and just get it going again.
Yeah, well, no, you're exactly right. I mean, what you're doing is what I like to call it is sort of cultural responsibility. I think the bigger orchestras in Australia really let the whole side down when they neglect to commission people, because it sounds almost crazy when you say it, but classical music will die if people do not keep writing new pieces, or if new pieces don't get played. And there's for some reason, so many people think that everything can just keep going, and there's just enough music already, and you can just keep playing that. I mean, sure, there's heaps of music. There's a lot of music in the world, but but you where's the music in the concert hall that responds to the fact that the internet exists, for example? Where's now is not the same as the 1800s, and so music for the 1800s is inherently, obviously still good, but people need relevance. The whole classical music world, in a funny way, is struggling for relevance, and they're not going to get it by playing the same stuff over and over and over again. Like Mendelssohn, fine, but no, why should a new listener who's never really engaged much with classical music but just wants to go and have a listen, why would they want to go and listen to a German guy from 150 years ago? You know?
Mm. I guess from my perspective is, I've heard the Beethoven symphonies so many times. I know them all back to front, inside out.
Mhm.
Every single part. I've just listened to countless times. And, I see the SSO advertise, ooh, Beethoven 7. And I think to myself, uh, okay, that'd be cool. I guess I haven't seen it live. I've heard 50 different recordings. But when something like last year, they did, it was the Tale of the Firebird, Chloe Charity, I think it was.
Mhm.
And that was done by the Freestyle Orchestra in Angel Place. I went to that, and that was fabulous. I hadn't heard the work, and I'm not quite sure how new it is, but it's new, and it's called The Tale of the Firebird, which depicts the story of the Firebird,
Mhm.
and it's very cool use of just different modes and different tone colors. It was kind of quasi a concerto, the violinist being the Firebird, and
Yeah.
and they had this acrobatic dancer on stage flying up and down, and it was very, very amazing, huge experience. And they played Ross Edwards Maninas as well, and that was classic,
Yeah.
what that's like in the 80s. And that was a great concert, and I thought, good, I don't need to listen to Beethoven this week. I'm listening to some new music and something from the 80s
Yeah.
as well.
I mean, isn't it just more engaging? There's a
Yes.
certain level where you just hear something that's new, even new to you, even if it's not particularly actually new. Like,
Yeah, like
if you
the
just hear
Edwards, I
something that's
hadn't actually.
not familiar, it's so much more engaging.
Yes. So the Ross Edwards, the Maninas, I knew of it, but I never actually heard it. So this was like super exciting. Going great. I actually haven't had the opportunity to listen to it. So this was a huge experience for me. And this new charity piece, The Tale of the Firebird, I was so gripped the entire way. Fantastic. And I thought, wow, I'm going to Google it now and tell you when it was composed.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that it had acrobat or a dancer or whatever in it.
Yeah, it was really cool. That
especially these days, composers or people who may not who kind of compose but might not necessarily be composers are much more willing to get outside of those little boxes to mix the arts up a little bit. And I think there's if you ignore that possibility, that's also a detriment to people. Like there's so much more artistic resources now. Everything is available. That we have all sorts of technology too. I think to go without all of that deliberately and stick with what you're doing is a recipe for disaster in the long term. Maybe it's a recipe to keep your 60-year-old subscriber base if you're a big orchestra, but they're gonna die eventually. It's terrible, but it's gonna happen, and we're gonna have come to a point where we're going to have to get a new audience. Shock horror.
Yeah, so this, actually, the premiere of this was last year in June the 7th, 2019, at the Angel Place. So brand new work, and a fantastic piece. I just haven't really been blown away that much in the Angel Place by new work, because in Angel Place I generally go to see the Brandenburg perform, which is great.
Yeah.
But new works, I'm starting to have a bit more of appreciation for them, especially as I mature as a musician, and I'm more aware of all the greats by Mahler, by Beethoven, by Schoenberg, by Stravinsky, and I'm understanding how they push the boundary. It makes me appreciate, wow, these people are kind of carrying on the torch, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the lesson of all the great composers. Really, is that. As much as whatever their political views were, they're all musical progressives, and that's kind of the most important thing, because music without progress doesn't exist.
It just stagnates and
we sort of end up where we are now, in a very awkward financial situation. Speaking of new pieces, I should tell you about mine, I think.
Yes, please do. I actually know nothing about it, so this is probably,
all right, here we go.
You're going to get nothing but my authentic response.
Oh dear, this is going to be like live and public eventually. So, what I've done is, I remember way back you said I mentioned an S word.
Yes.
For a particular type of orchestral piece, and I said I'm not going to call it that probably unless it's good, and so I am still not calling it that unless I decide it's good, but it's probably what it is. So it's a pretty big piece in 3 movements. I think they'll stay 3 movements. The overall,
okay, good.
Yep. The length, I can't really tell you, but I need to explain why I can't tell you what the length is. So, I'm writing the piece, and the start of it is the reason why I kind of wanted to do this, obviously, is as I explained, I was raised on Bruckner and Mahler. I've always wanted to have a go at doing the big thing myself.
Yes.
It's not going to be that long, though, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
I think
I was about to say we need to fill in a Dvorak cello concerto in there as well. Don't forget.
But in my head was the famous Mahler quote where Mahler and Stravinsky were going for a walk around. Not Stravinsky, sorry. Mahler and Sibelius, the 2 great early 20th century symphonists, were walking around at Sibelius's home in Finland. And they're having a discussion about, amazing metaphysical discussion. And I wish that there was a recording that existed of this. But they're both talking about what the symphony should be. What's the point of writing a symphony? And Sibelius says that it should really be something more concerned with its own internal structure, and that the drama should come from the inside of the symphony and the working of the themes and everything. And Mahler says, no, a symphony should be like the world. It should contain everything. And that's the exact quote. And I was like, cool. What does that actually mean now? Back in the day for Mahler, that kind of really just meant a sort of gigantic existential therapy session, contemplating the whole of existence simultaneously. But these days, it's a little bit more, there's different concerns that are prevalent, I mean, everywhere you go, for every person, no matter of your political persuasion or whatever, there's this little whisper of the apocalypse. There's a sense that that things aren't right. I mean, with the coronavirus, obviously things aren't right, but more broadly, there's this kind of what's going on. Everything's changing a little bit, and there's something sort of unnatural about the way it's all happening.
Is the bubble going to burst, so to speak?
Yes.
Will society collapse soon?
So this is
the environment, everything.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to make it explicitly a sort of climate change symphony, but it kind of that's really one of the big things at the heart of the thing. That the question of what the hell's going to happen tomorrow. And why is today not what I expected it to be?
There's a great deal of uncertainty.
Yeah, and so the first movement of this piece it's based on, the whole design of it is to make it sort of quite inevitable. It's more or less a big crescendo.
Right, okay.
I don't know, probably 10 minutes or so. And it's based on a certain pitch collection. I think it's E flat, E natural, F sharp, D flat, G natural, A, B, and D. And
can you say that again, please?
It is. I'll go over to the piano and play it for you. Hang on.
I've got one here with me.
Oh, wait. I gotta. Yeah, okay. You can play it. It is an E flat up high, and an E natural the octave below, and then an F sharp the next octave down.
Oh, next octave down.
Yep, and then a D flat in the top octave, and then a G next to that F sharp, and then an A in the middle octave. Yep, and then a B below the F sharp, and then a D the next octave down. Yep. So you've just played the heart of the piece. That's kind of it. And the first movement is more or less trying to piece that together. So it starts very slowly. You just get a couple of the notes. It's mostly sort of harmonics and little sort of zips and bells and stuff. It's all very
little fragments
airy.
coming in.
Yep, it comes out
Yep.
of just sort of a big dark bass drum rumble with all the low brass to sort of
Very cool. They'll be very happy.
Yep. And that just sort of builds up slowly and fails a couple of times until we finally get there.
It's searching.
Yep. And but when we get to the end of it, it has to resolve. This is the tricky part because it's a big chord and it resolves a whole lot of different ways and it sort of tries out different resolutions of itself along the way of the movement. The real resolution.
Has it got a name, this chord?
Oh, no, I don't know. It's just the chord. It's the important one.
Okay, a chord. I like that. Okay.
And the counterbalance to that in the movement is this lyrical theme, which is entirely romantic, like completely very tonal, a little bit, there's a couple little harmonic surprises in it, but there's nothing very serious. And that's
right.
Like the sort of, I mean, yeah, it serves as the sort of emotional counterbalance. Every time the tension from the chord builds up, there's just that little release, and there's little snips of it occasionally until the chord and this melody are throughout the movement trying to assemble themselves, basically. And there's a big moment where we finally get the full chord and it cuts, and this hopefully will be the best moment of the whole piece, where it's just absolutely still. And we hear this melody finally for the first time in the clarinet with just the most bare little sort of tinkly accompaniment. And
wow,
that's kind of like the real heart moment of the movement. And then it'll all sort of build up and there's a big fat statement of it and it just sort of blasts its way out to the end. But that's the first movement. That's the movement.
That's very cool.
Which I'm calling, in a funny way, how it sort of should be. And the second movement, what I decided to do is, because this is playing on the idea that things aren't kind of how they should be, that I cannibalize the first movement. So it starts exactly the same. And throughout the thing, there's basically, the first movement is kind of almost always present. Like almost exactly the
underlying
same
unifying feature.
Yeah. But I've gone and done a hack job on it and absolutely spliced things together, put stuff in the wrong place. There's just a lot of, it gets constantly interrupted by itself. Like in the way that the seasons are completely wrong these days. We have super cold days in winter, in summer, and super hot days in winter, and all that sort of thing. That's kind of the idea.
Oh, that's really clever.
There's just bits of the wrong material spliced into the wrong places. But over the top of it, so there's this process gets worse and worse. It starts really recognizably as the first movement and sort of just gets a bit more fucked as it goes. And the real chaos begins where I open the orchestra up a little bit to improvising very gradually. But the way the score is designed, a lot of it is not in any kind of fixed tempo at all. And
so is it using seconds, duration? Is it more gestured bass? And like, are these improvise? Do they have like little cells that like, here's your pitch set material?
Well, there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of, there's more material obviously than what I can bother to explain.
Yeah. I mean,
it
starts we're not going to say the S word.
There's this sort of creepy scale material, which comes out of certain parts of the first movement. And it just sort of begins to overwhelm everything until it turns into full-on chaotic improvisation with the whole orchestra just absolutely going wild for a bit. Which is going to be really fun. It's going to be so loud. And
are you gonna play, or are you gonna do the classic composer thing, sit in the crowd?
I don't know. I mean, you might let me conduct it.
Oh, well, that's actually a pretty good idea. Hey,
I don't know. We'll see. You'll need to see the score first, I think, to decide.
Right.
But I wouldn't mind conducting it.
Cool.
But partly because when you ask, are there seconds or are there some other way of controlling the whole bloody thing? At the moment, it's kind of all in my head, all the actual timing. And I need to, when I get organized enough, go and write down sort of time brackets for everything and measure the piece out. Because then I can give you an actual length for the bloody thing.
Yeah, and it could be reproducible should another orchestra say,
it needs to be. Ultimately, it needs to be reproducible. So I can't be keeping it in my head for too long, and I need to write it down eventually. No. But this is why, at the moment, it's not conductible by anyone except me, but it will be.
Only you have the keys.
Yeah, this is just me being a lazy composer, basically. Yeah,
okay.
so there's this moment, everything's chaos, everyone's improvising like hell, and there's the ultimate juxtaposition, I'm calling it, between chaos and order, where the bass drum sort of sneaks up on everyone, doing very strict 120 beats per minute, very slowly, getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder through all of this chaos until it absolutely just is ripping through everything. And the whole orchestra will gradually sort of find themselves locked into that. And there's it happens twice actually, but the first time it doesn't last very long. There's the absolutely nasty climax of the second movement is the whole orchestra just slamming together at the same time on a random cluster of whatever notes they want. I think there'll be a pair of piccolos absolutely duking it out on the top of it, just like improvising crazily over the top of the whole thing. And that it's basically...
Imagine Susie going crazy on that.
It's like a big orchestral catastrophe, basically. Like what should have been the first movement gets absolutely, completely fucked up. So what happens next is that fails really, like it just the tempo begins to leak out of it. Everyone begins to come out of time, and it just gets quieter and quieter and quieter and just dies completely, basically. And so we get to the start of the third movement, which is not finished yet. And the start of the third movement, lo and behold, is the start of the other ones. So the same bass drum, boop, 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 and low instruments making rumbly sounds. Except this time, everything's been basically annihilated from the first movement. And the whole of this movement is to gradually rise from the ashes of the other two movements.
It's like a rebirth, kind of like a phoenix almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had the silly realization that this is the scheme is not entirely unlike Mahler 2, but there's no choir in it.
Right. Okay, I was about to say, hang on a second, is there a choir?
And there's one movement.
You're just going to put this spin on me.
Yeah, and this movement isn't going to be like a half an hour long miniature opera, because that's what the end of Mahler 2 really is. But it sort of does the same function. The whole point will be really gradually to sort of make the piece come alive. It's very slow bass melodies. Everything is just creeping upwards and upwards and upwards very, very gradually. There'll be little interruptions of things from before just to make sure that, we still know it all fucked up. And we'll gradually get to some sort of conclusion which will hopefully leave everyone not too disturbed. But still with the feeling that this is why I had to do a piece which isn't 10 minutes long. Because you need
you just need time.
This is kind of has to live off what's come before. Like this sort of structure doesn't work unless it's given space to breathe. This kind of long 3-movement drama, which is what it really is, as in my head at least, if I pull it off. And so cool. The ending will hopefully be some sort of, I don't want it to be a bombastic symphonic ending. Like so many great symphonies are sort of ruined by endings that are a little just bit too straightforward. By the time they get to the end, it's just 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, whatever. But there'll be some sort of restoration of what was good about the first movement, and
right, everyone
should go home feeling, feeling that particular feeling of when you've listened to a big fat piece, a cosmic piece like Bruckner 8 or something. That's right. the ideal, when you just go like, a lot happened there, and you have to go and process that for a long time. And hopefully I get the audience into that kind of state.
Yeah. What's it scored for, Reese?
It's scored for not a ridiculous orchestra. It's what is it? It's
because I remember you saying like, I'm going to need triple winds and triple bass, and I said to you, look, they won't be able to play in the rest of the so it'd be very tricky to get the players for that. Just in terms of
it is still triple winds, so it's
okay, so it is still that good. Okay, that's a challenge for me. Good.
So it's a piccolo and 2 flutes, 2 oboes. It'll only be 2 oboes. I can't justify having a choral glaze. There's no reason.
Okay, yeah, 2 oboes. That's good.
3 clarinets, 3
Mhm.
bassoons, including contrabassoon, because contrabassoon is the best instrument in the woodwind family.
It is surprisingly good, isn't it? It's just I hate carrying it. Oh my gosh.
If you had to carry one of those things around, Jesus Christ.
I've had to carry it a few
You
times.
should
it's
feel
not
sorry for bloody Shelby and Andrew London who had to drag that thing halfway across Europe to on the Spain tour.
Oh dear.
That was quite
Yeah.
funny. And what's the brass
That's
section?
not fun.
The brass section's normal. So there's 3 trumpets and 4 horns, 3 trombones, a tuba.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
At the moment, it's scored for 5 percussion, which I don't need. I'm going to cut down to 3 because it's stupid.
Okay.
You don't need 5 percussionists, including the timpani. There's a piano and a harp, and then the normal still the string section. Hopefully, the biggest string section we can get, but whatever, we'll have to make do with what we get.
I have some very exciting news about potential partnerships and guaranteed players, which I'll tell you off air.
Oh,
but
no
don't
big
you worry,
announcement for this one.
No big announcement for this one. It's still.
I mean, everyone's just had a big
partnerships.
spoiler of this piece, like big time. So
They have, but I mean, just rest assured, those who are listening, which the actual crowd seems to be growing every single week, which is great.
Oh.
It's that we'll have a full symphony orchestra in December, which I'm super excited.
Yes.
We've kind of had like 80% of a full orchestra. You know what I mean?
We've had an orchestra apart from the string section, quite.
Yeah,
about
like
it.
violins. Once we've had it like for Scheherazade, which is huge, but we've always had something lacking. So I think for the Scheherazade concert, we were lacking violas and cellos. We were fine for double basses actually. And then winds and brass were always fine.
Yeah.
So
Well,
look, 3 clarinets are easy.
Yeah, this is what I'm banking on. I'm banking on a good wind section because they're probably the hardest the parts in this are the brass and the wind parts. The string parts are all pretty easy, to be honest. I've designed it kind of so that it shouldn't be too hard to rehearse. It's a lot of the reason why so much of it's actually so loose. I thought I can give the musicians a little bit of freedom, and players like it when they're allowed to actually bring themselves to the piece a little bit. I think once the sort of terms of the rules of the whole thing is set, people are usually a little bit timid about it. But once they realize they can just sort of play it in the way they like, is the way the music works for them, then that works. But it also saves having to have everything very exactly timed. I could have written the whole piece out. And it's also me being a lazy composer too. I kind of don't really decide when a lot of things happen, apart from just the overall pacing. But there's it shouldn't hopefully be too tricky to rehearse, even though it is going to be. I want us to have more time to shape the drama of the piece than the notes. I don't want everyone learning the notes for a long time.
Yeah. I'm not sure about you, but the experience I've had so far with all these newly commissioned works is that I think people are less concerned about playing the notes, like every single thing perfectly 100% technically flawless for new works, and they're more about bringing their own musicality to it as well as capturing the essence of the work. Is it? And that's what you want here, right?
Yeah, it's basically that. Like I've made the decision that what's important isn't the accuracy, and so I've just given the musicians the freedom to just do it.
Yes.
A lot of the time.
And I do find that liberating about new works. Is that I feel that as a conductor as well. There's no pressure to they have to play the phrasing like this and they have to do everything meticulously correct. It's
things like the phrasing. It's funny that you actually mentioned it because in a piece like this, when the sense of time is made just a bit looser, you get a sense of phrase more naturally. I generally find.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not preconceived and it's not like synthesized and like
So like the phrasing really matters big time in this piece, but
it's just more natural.
Yeah, and the thing should hopefully breathe. It's funny.
Yeah.
Funny way of talking about it, but I often talk about my music breathing right. Like I think it's such a brass player kind of way of putting it, but the flow of a piece does need to have the same sense of being as natural as breathing.
Yes, and a good orchestra has a sense of everyone breathing together because I do that with a modest all the time because I'm a brass player and that's what I do. Breathing is such a big part of everything I do.
Yes, this is why there shouldn't be so many conductors who are really piano players.
Oh, we can get into a whole discussion
Shots
about
fired,
piano conductor.
but
Shots
yeah,
fired.
yeah,
I'm not saying anything, but I'm not saying anything at the same time. There's advantages and
yes, yeah.
disadvantages
Um,
to certain instrumental conductors.
I should tell you about the way that this score works, though, because I haven't made it so loose, even though it doesn't have the time brackets fixed on it yet. I haven't made it so loose that it's completely unplayable yet. I've done a little think and made a system of queuing that's very simple from the conductor's point of view, but all over the piece of
Oh,
paper,
good.
and from the musician's point of view, so that hopefully no one can actually get lost. The idea is that it's actually literally impossible to get lost in this piece, because
Okay.
every time someone has to do something new, there's a little triangle wedge thing above them, and that is a sign for the conductor to give them a big old cue. And
Okay.
there's some different versions of that. There's one with a C in it, which means continue whatever you were doing last time if there was some sort of interruption to it, or people have to learn maybe 5 or 6 little symbols for them, but they're all pretty simple, and
Mhm.
that is more or less the conductor's score. Like the main score will actually have a line on the top, which is just the conductor. And that will have particular information just for the conductor, which the musicians don't actually
Wow.
need on their part. And the combination of that, and it's going to have rehearsal marks basically every bar, is the idea, because in order to
Mhm.
get it's all well and good having the conductor individually cue everything, but the conductor doesn't have 63 arms.
No, I've only got 2, unfortunately. I'm working on sprouting the third one, but
Yeah, I mean, you
that's
got
2
a
years away
leg.
at
You can,
least.
if you can balance really well, you can conduct with your leg, I suppose.
I used to do dancing, Reese.
Oh, oh dear, yeah,
And
yeah.
great dancing at weddings.
Great
you know,
dancing.
I
Can
used
you
to,
just cue all the players by throwing plates at them?
I think so, yeah. We'll have to get the plaster ones because they shatter
Yeah,
more
yeah,
easily
yeah.
than
That'll-
ceramic.
That'll be a little bit better. We can have a bit of a baking session before we start the piece. But yeah, what the conductor will have, and the original idea was going to actually be that everyone was playing off a video score, but I realized that was just sort of too hard for me to bother to do. It would have worked, but it
Yeah.
was too much trouble. Instead, the conductor will have little screens next to them, which just have a number, and those numbers will correspond to the rehearsal marks, which are going to be absolutely bloody all over the parts. And probably either there'll be a separate person sitting in the corner on a laptop following the score and pressing the video marks, pressing those rehearsal marks on the little screen, or the conductor will
Right.
just have a foot pedal. And so
I do have this foot pedal, so we could look into that.
yeah, I mean, we'll sort of see how the coordination goes with all that, but that sort of thing.
Right.
But in a way, it means that the conductor can look after what's important. But if there's other changes that aren't particularly important, the players will just see the number on the screen and go, "Oh, look, yeah, that's where we are. Okay, we'll do that one now."
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So hopefully,
That's
no
really
one
easy to
should get
set up.
lost unless the bloody thing
Hopefully.
fails. The absolute
I think
nightmare would be
it's-
failure. But yeah.
Or you have what happened to me once at a gig. A certain player, I was at a gig, rocked up with his iPad, and decided after driving for 2 hours on a bus, rocked up, had a portable battery pack, mind you, rocked up to the gig and said, "All right, Panny, I'm ready to play oboe." And you know who it is. And he pulled it out and it had 0% battery. And I go, "Hey, what?" He goes, "Oh, don't worry, I'll just plug it in. We got to play in 2 minutes." He goes, "Oh, whoops." It's like, and he goes, "Oh, I'll just plug into my battery pack." It's like, so on the whole 2-hour bus ride, it didn't occur to you to check your iPad? No. Luckily, I had my iPad with a complete backup of everything, and it was all fine. But we'll have to make sure everyone is charged up and ready to go.
Yes, but there should only be 2 or 3 screens maximum around the conductor, so it should be fairly foolproof. But that reminds me of a great story. You should ask Cameron McPherson, Big Cam, I call him. He's a lovely guy. In a WinSynth concert once, he managed to lose his part, and this was for the biggest piece we ever did in WinSynth, which was Maslanka Symphony No. 8.
Oh, Maslanka, I love him. David
You
Maslanka.
got to go and find the recording of it. It's pretty incredible.
Is there the con version?
Yeah, it's on the con
recording of
YouTube
that?
page.
Oh, that's cool. I'll look at that.
It's like the best. It's the biggest thing I've ever actually done is in a euphonium playing capacity. Cam
know the
managed
boss
to
well.
so Cam managed to lose his part to this, and the piece is 45 minutes long. So he ended up going to John Lynch, and John gave him a photocopy of the handwritten score that's non-transposed,
No.
and he managed to
Oh,
play the
no.
whole piece off a handwritten score, which isn't transposed and is in terrible handwriting. And he got through the piece fine. And there's like a couple really big bass clarinet solo moments in it too, and everything. It was really great. So it could be
Wow,
worse.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It could be worse, yeah. I always like to do a thing. I've got this HP NV5223 that's under my desk right now.
Mhm.
And you've probably noticed I bring my printer from home to every single concert.
Yeah.
I kid you not. And I have the entirety of our entire music library, which is all very well organized, on my computer, ready to go. Reese, you won't believe how many times that thing's been used.
Oh,
in all the
yeah.
concerts.
Yeah, I bet.
Every concert, someone goes, "Oh, I've forgotten my music." It's like, no worries. I have my own personal printer here. And they go, "What?"
That's great because it's like, it doesn't happen so much at the con because people are getting marked on that sort of thing. But if it's an orchestra, which is really a volunteer gig,
then they're gonna be like, "Oh, I forgot my music." No worries, it's got my printer. They're like, "Huh?"
That's brilliant. Oh dear.
Yeah. All right, Reese. I think we'll end it there.
All right.
Any last things you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, I mean I already got in my big rant about commissioning new music and all that. So
It was a good rant, and
I
it's
should
good
say
we see eye to eye on
I
that.
will feed the whole orchestra dumplings when we do this piece, just because that's a thing.
Oh, good.
And I'm about
That
to
puts
drop a
pressure off my
video
mother.
of how to make my dumplings.
Oh, great. Okay, that puts pressure off my mother to cook for the orchestra. So, good. We'll liaise with that. I
Yeah.
love that idea, and I'll help you with that. Actually, we can cook dumplings together.
Oh shit! Yes.
Uh,
There's no better therapy than making dumplings.
I bet it's the same thing with making tudor pitaya for just cooking is just a great
It's
therapy.
meditation. Oh my god! Just folding the
It
little
is.
things, just making hundreds and hundreds of them.
It's good fun.
This is serious chat. now.
Yeah. So I guess we should tell everyone when the concert is. It's going to be on the
yeah.
8th of December
Mm.
in the Verbruggen Hall.
Woo.
That is provided this coronavirus doesn't drag out
Yeah.
any further.
Fingers
Let's hope
crossed.
it. Fingers crossed. I mean, if we're going off anything, the ASCO has cancelled their program up until September, so that's an indication of when to expect
Yeah.
concerts.
I
to
mean, you have to
resume.
hope it'll blow over by then, but.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If not, we can always,
and I think everyone
find
hopes
another-
that there's going to be a big recovery movement from it, and everyone will go out to live concerts because everyone will be bloody desperate for it. We can make
Yeah.
a bit of an
So I
event out of it. It can be defiance of the coronavirus.
yeah. That'll be the theme of the Modest Presents the Corona reaction something.
That sounds like what happens in hospital.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll go with
And
that title.
No, I don't think we'll go with that title. Might be a little bit tone deaf, as they say. Yeah. Well, Reese, thank you for coming on the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Right? Yeah, I did.
And hopefully we'll have you back. We might do like a brass session. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Talk about other musical things. We can talk about Mahler. We can talk about Beethoven.
Woo.
But let me have my homework, please. Do my homework, please, because I know
Yeah.
you are very well versed when it comes to just general music.
Not as well as my
So-
reputation suggests.
Yes.
There's people who know
All
much
right.
more than me. All right.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Reese.
See ya.
Bye.